Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Is Your Child Being Denied FAPE? Just as a reminder, FAPE is free and appropriate public education. We went through yesterday what all of the acronyms stand for and what they mean, so I'm not going to spend time doing that now. I want to get right to the meat today. First of all, on the COVID-19 front, there are 66,497 total cases in Michigan. There are 6,036 deaths in Michigan, hobbling around that 10% mark, maybe a little lower now. And a couple kind of amazing statistics that I found are over 998,000 people in Michigan have been tested. They're not, most of them are the diagnostic test, not the more sensitive test, but still, that's a huge number of people. Another little dandy little statistic is that 13 counties in Michigan have between 500 cases and 11,752 cases, which is a huge span, but that's 13 counties. Then there's one county that has no cases, and that is Ontonagon in the UP. And then with those numbers in mind, the city of Detroit alone has 11,384 cases. So literally what we're seeing is Detroit has almost the same amount as 13 counties. And so it's interesting in that regard. So before we get into how you develop an IEP, I thought it might be a good idea to talk about things we talked about yesterday, mistakes that parents often make when they go to the IEP. Today I want to talk about, before we get into the development of the IEP, 6 tips for parents to think about to prepare for the IEP. And then we'll get into that. If you have any questions, as always, please just put them in the chat or send me a message, and I'll try to pay attention to it as we go. The first thing that people should do when they're preparing for an IEP meeting is to remember that you are not a parent when you are in that meeting. You have to be an advocate for your child. You have to be part of the team that is cheering for your child's success in school. And that includes the administration, the special ed director, the teacher, any parapros who are involved, any people who, speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists. You are all a team. Everybody wants the best for your child. You are, as parents, our hopes and desires are measured by a different level of success than what the school is going to measure them at. And that's when parents usually get really emotional. And as soon as emotion comes into this process, it becomes acrimonious and adversarial unnecessarily really fast. So I think the best way to stay focused and to feel that you are empowered to fight for the education that your child deserves is to prepare. So the first thing you should do is write a list of issues that you feel are important. So for example, if you feel that during stay-at-home learning, distance learning, your child did not have enough math homework or math study, or the math packet that was sent home was not at your student's level, it wasn't something that your student could do, If it was too complicated and you couldn't teach the new way that they do division, you should write all of that down in advance, because not only do you want to make sure that the access to education is appropriate in the new IEP, but you also want to make sure that if there was education missed because the wrong resources were provided, that's a different situation, and that's a situation where your child might be entitled to compensatory education, which will probably not be discussed or dealt with in your IEP, but it's something that we advocate for our clients, or empower parents to advocate for within the department informally if they can't put it in the IEP. Another reason to do that is because then and if you write down your list of issues, it's also helpful to present it to the team before you get to the meeting, so that they are at least thinking about it and they may have some productive solutions. There's no surprise in an IEP meeting that has a good outcome the day of the IEP meeting. And I tell you that after attending many, many, many IEP meetings for many different kids with many different disabilities or many health issues that allow them to have special accommodations in school, for example, diabetes. So that's really important. It's also, you need to prepare your own list of questions or items that you want addressed. You should ask for a blank copy of the IEP form that has the components listed before the meeting, and you can jot your questions down right in the proper section of the form. A lot of districts cut corners and they send a draft IEP before the meeting. This is really a violation of the IDEA. They're not supposed to do that. And so asking for a blank form, then as you're working through it as a team, then you ask your questions at the right time. You can include things in the right part of the IEP instead of, well, I really think we need this, but they're not there yet. And then you get to there and you forget about it. So that's a helpful tip. It's also great to be an informed participant in the meeting and in the process. So you want to make sure that you have all of your child's latest objectives, placement recommendations, evaluations, proposed goals prior to the meeting. And, sometimes that may come in the form of an IEP already being filled out, but if there's been new evaluations, you should have copies of those evaluations before the meeting, because they're going to be adopted and the goals are going to be set based on that evaluation, and you are not informed and able to ask the right questions if you are not, if you don't have it in advance. There is obviously written notice of the meeting and it lists all the participants. And as parents, you should review the list of participants, because everyone who has a box, who is in an other on the IEP form, is required to be there unless the parent waives their presence. So there must be someone representing the district. There must be someone who's a gen ed teacher. There must be a special ed teacher. There must be a speech and language pathologist. There must be an occupational therapist. There must be a physical therapist. Usually there's a principal or an assistant principal there as well. The school psychologist may be there. I think I already said the pathologist. So depending on your child's disability or how they're certified, it may change the players of who is required to be there. Of course, with notice to the district or to the IEP coordinator, you can bring whoever you want that you think has useful knowledge about how your child learns or how your child should be taught. That's where the nanny and the babysitter and the tutor and all those people come in. So keep that in mind. A lot of people now, especially since we're doing IEPs by Zoom, are asking me if they're allowed to record the Zoom. The IDEA has no provisions that allow or preclude recording. I would suggest as a measure of good practice that if you want to record your IEP meeting, you just tell everyone that you're recording it. It should be fine. Really, there shouldn't be anything said in that IEP meeting that shouldn't be known to other people within the constraints of permission by the parents or the student. Moving on, you want to know who's going to be there. If there's anyone who's done outside evaluations, sometimes it's helpful to have them available to answer questions. Of course, if you know that there's questions in advance, that is better too. And if it is your first IEP meeting, there's a lot of resources. We have a packet that we give out to people if they're about to go to their first IEP meeting, but certainly online, there's many resources to help parents get ready and to really understand who the players are and what each of them's role is in your child's education. And that comes right down to yesterday. I told you one of the biggest mistakes parents make is they don't understand their child's disability. If you don't understand your child's disability, you're not going to be able to advocate to make sure that the accommodations and supports are appropriate. You may be able to agree with what everyone's saying, but really, to be the most effective for your child, you need to understand the disability and you need to understand the amount of, there's so many services out there. It's so creative now. It's so easy to level the playing field for kids to learn. But you got to know about it. You got to ask for it. You have to insist that you get it, and you have to have it in writing. Having it in writing is critical. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And the other thing that you as a parent have to know and is really helpful before you're going into an IEP meeting is you really need to know your child. And you need to kind of have a parent vision statement. Like, my child's ideal school experience looks like this or includes this. My child's strengths are this. The weaknesses or challenges are this. My child does better learning about sports than they do about gardening. My child, can focus longer if it's about hockey. My child, is we talked about in the first second episode, Tuesday, we talked about the 4 different kinds of learners. You should be familiar before you go to your first IEP meeting of what kind of learner your child is. Some kids are really little when they have their first IEP, so you might not know. But at least in your mind, knowing the different criteria for the 4 kinds of learners can help you to kind of ask the right questions and steer the conversation. And it's also, if there are, if you have samples of work that your child's done at home, I know that a lot of times parents video their child reading or writing or playing, some sort of tactile letter game. And they take those videos or those pictures or that work to the IEP meeting and say, like, yeah, I get it that the evaluation says that my child can't read, but here, watch this. He's reading a book. And be prepared to answer the questions. Was this the first time he picked up the book? Was this an instance where he wasn't familiar with the book? Was this a book that you have been practicing? And make sure that you're prepared to explain what methodology you use to practice reading the book to accomplish mastery of reading the book. So, knowing your child is really the most important part of advocating for your child, because you know how they learn. The team may have worked with your child or may have heard about your child, but you are the one who really, really knows your child. So now I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. Let me just grab my notes here. Maybe. Here they are. Okay. I'm trying to be very orderly. And so, so how do you, you know what? I'm so orderly that I forgot where I put it. Okay. When you develop an IEP, it's a process, and it's a process that has, it has goals, and you have to have a way to measure those goals, and you have to have a way to measure the progress in reaching those goals. And really, the goal of an IEP meeting is to negotiate as a team to obtain quality special education services for a child, and to build a healthy working relationship with that child and the parents in order for the child to succeed. Now remember, whenever we're talking about FAPE, we are talking about an appropriate education. We are not talking about the best education or the, elite education. We are talking about an appropriate education, and it's the same appropriate education that is promised by the law to a general ed student as is promised to a special ed student. If you want to look up the IDEA, it's www.ideapractices.org. There's a lot of resources on that page. I find it very helpful. And you'll notice whenever you're talking about IEPs, it's in writing. It has to be in writing to be valid. And there are certain components that every IEP must have. So the first component, sorry, I have to put my glasses on, and it was a big decision today. Do we go red glasses with red t-shirt, or should we have gone a different color? But these were sitting on my desk, and I just happened to wear the red t-shirt, so I hope it's not too distracting for you. But anyway, the first thing is there's going to be an initial evaluation, and that is basically related to child find that we talked about yesterday. And the initial evaluation is going to identify if your child is eligible for special education services in the first place. And then depending on which of the enumerated disabilities your child falls into, then that will shape the rest of the IEP and what needs to be addressed. There are formal procedures for how an IEP meeting is conducted. As I said, there needs to be notice. Everyone who's going to be there should be listed and known before the meeting. And there should be, and children do have a right to be there. So it gives everyone a chance to evaluate if the child should be there or not. And part of the IEP process is to also determine exactly what the educational needs are of each individual child. The report has to have parental consent. There are two different issues with consent. First is the consent for the evaluation. The second is the consent for the IEP team to convene and discuss your child, and then putting the IEP services in place would be kind of the third prong of all of that. If parents refuse to consent that for the evaluation, then the evaluation can go forward anyway, but you cannot put services in place for that child unless the parents consent again. So an IEP is a legal document, and it's a program. It's a guide. It's how to educate this child. It's a plan for success in school. So when we're looking at all of those things, how do we figure it out? And basically, it's by asking questions in the meeting. And you want to think about, how did I get here? Is there something I can point to where my child, got behind or seemed more challenged, or something that, someone along the way recommended that didn't follow through, either by the educator or by the parents or whoever else was supposed to deliver that system. You need to talk about in the IEP meeting and in formulating the program what your child's challenges and strengths are. That's why I suggested that you do that ahead of time so that you are ready. And again, if you're tuning in late, I can't say this enough times. If you are preparing for an IEP meeting, you want a blank form you can either get it from the IEP coordinator, or you can get it online. It's written by the Department of Education. It's no secret. And in preparation for your child's IEP, go through that form, write all your questions, write which challenge or which strength or everything in the section of the IEP that's going to talk about it. Because that's the only way that you're not going to fall through the cracks with your questions and concerns in the meeting. This team is doing probably 8 or 10 meetings a day right now at the end of school and beginning of school. They are doing, and especially because of the distance learning debacle, every single one is based on, at this point, on imperfect data. So remember, we talked about before, the reason we have an IEP is because we have measurable goals, we have baseline data, we monitor progress. Well, right now, most kids who are having their IEPs for next year, right now, early summer, they don't have baseline data. We don't know where these kids are since distance learning began. I've had 6 or 7 IEP meetings in the last 2 weeks, and that has been an issue in every single one. So that is, that's something else, just to consider, that you don't have baseline data. So you want to make sure that in the IEP, every area, your child will be evaluated in the fall. Okay, so speech and language, comprehensive evaluation, it should be done in the fall so that you can reconvene the team based on where your child really is and put anything in place that isn't in place or take things away that you don't need. All kids fall behind in the summer, but kids with disabilities are already behind before we even got to summer. And again, don't forget that kind of have in the back of your mind that each child may be entitled to compensatory education. That's a case-by-case basis, and something that, essentially you try to negotiate or mediate or use alternative resolution to get, but sometimes we do have to file a lawsuit. The IEP team is not allowed to predetermine what is in the IEP, which is why you shouldn't get a draft before the meeting. However, you should know what they're looking at and what goals they're looking at before the meeting so you can be prepared. So it's kind of a fine line if a draft is a predetermination or not. I would suggest that the way that it's not a predetermination is if the placement recommendations and all of the supports and services are not listed. Those sections are not completed. So you're basically only seeing the strengths, the challenges, and the goals ahead of time. Another thing to remember, specifically, the most important part of the IEP is the goals. And I would say in 10 out of 10 IEPs that I review, the goals are inadequate. The goals are too vague. The goals aren't understandable. Remember, the test for a good IEP, I'm not even telling you about a great IEP, is whether or not a substitute teacher, someone who never met your child before, could pick up this document and know how they learn and know how they need to be taught. I mean, that is the bottom line, that simple little test. So if you have a goal, a reading goal, for example, that says that, so there's long-term goals and short-term goals. So the long-term goal is, by June 15th, 2021, Joey is going to read a 25-page book. Then it will say short-term goals, will be that Joey will read a 25-page book, in one sitting or with 5 prompts or cues or, whatever it can be by December. And then there'll be another one till March. They'll do it with less cues. Okay? That's a terrible goal. The reason it's a terrible goal is because it doesn't specify if they're reading the same 25-page book, different 25-page books, a 25-page book that they've already learned the story on, or something that's totally foreign and new and they've never seen before. Is it a book with pictures to assist them in identifying words? Do you want them to be able to read the book by putting sounds together and create and then coming out with the word, or do you want it to be totally fluent reading without stopping and sounding out? Do you want it to be a 25-page book at grade level, at the last place that they were evaluated to be in reading, at that grade level, or a more challenging grade level? The list goes on and on. The other really awful goal that we see is when they say that something should be mastered to 70%. Okay? Well, what is 70%? 70% of what? 70% of 100%? But still, is that 70% every day for a certain period of days with the same material? Or is that 7 out of 10 correct on, 4 days of spelling tests instead of one a week? I mean, it's not defined enough. And so in order to measure progress, you have to have, really defined what we're using to measure it. With younger kids, a lot of their goals have to do with shapes, and a lot of their goals have to do with identifying the shape, stacking the shapes. Sometimes the shapes might have numbers on them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for example. So when you're writing an IEP goal that you're dealing with, shape identification, in order for it to be measured, they should be the same blocks that are used when you evaluate it on Monday that you're using when you evaluate it 3 weeks later. And so that you really can tell. And as I said earlier, a stranger should be able to tell if there's been progress in an area if the goals are defined with enough specificity. And always the goal should be set to improve the skills to obtain grade level. And so what do you need in order for this child to obtain grade level in whatever skill we're talking about? They need to be objective, and they need to be very well defined. And when you're asking these questions about the goals, like, is it a book they're familiar with or a book that they're not familiar with? And they give you the answer, you want the answer in the IEP. The most irritating thing, and this just happened this week, I sat in an IEP meeting for 4.5 hours for a first grader, which is pretty unheard of that it would take that long, but I was so thankful that they, actually gave us all the time. And then they sent us, the draft afterward, and literally not one goal that we carefully defined had been rewritten. And if it's not in writing, it never happened. We can't enforce things that we remember saying, only things that are in writing. Has to be in the document. It's a legal document that you're making when you make an IEP. So that is my soapbox about goals. And as I said, 10 out of 10 IEPs I review, the goals are not adequate. Some other things to keep in mind. Sorry, I need my glasses here to read I'm going to cheat and look at my outline for a minute. And, so again, with the measuring of the goals, it means that you should be able to count it, observe it, and document it. And each goal should target an individual need of the child. And these goals in this progress should be observable, as I said, by the teacher, by a parent, and by a stranger. It's all really, really important. You want to have a paper trail always, everything, every email, every rescheduling of the meeting, who's going to be there, who's not going to be there. The more that you tell them ahead of time, you're kind of training them to tell you ahead of time as a parent, and then you can be more prepared. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of creative accommodations and supports out there, and I have them broken down and kind of made a master list throughout the years of academic accommodations that we can ask for in college, things we can ask for in high school, things that work better in middle school, things that the younger grades are separated into smaller chunks. It's not just like, grade, 3 to 6. We have one that's 5 and 6. We have another one that's 3 and 4, and then one that's 2, one that's 1, and one that's kindergarten and pre-K. And so there's, as I mentioned earlier, the more you know before you go, the better it's going to be. Your child's best advocate. And in the same way that you would not engage in, a meeting for yourself or a doctor's appointment without being prepared and thinking about it before you get there, you have to do that here. It's essential. I love this quote, and I think it's very empowering. Sometimes you face difficulties not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something right. And I will tell you that, as all the feelings that parents have when their child has learning challenges are hard and they're real. And but with knowledge and preparation, you can be armed to fight the best battle ever to get your child what they deserve and what the law guarantees them. So I thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow as we continue our series on whether your child has been denied FAPE. And again, if you have any questions, either post them on the page, email me, messenger me. I love hearing from you. If you have any topics you want me to talk about specifically, happy to make this as fan-centered as I can. My little favor I asked yesterday, I'm going to ask again today because we're almost at our goal. If you could like our Facebook page, that would be great. And if you can go to our YouTube channel, where eventually all of these videos will be posted. I think probably 40 videos from 5 Reasons Not to Harm Your Family During Quarantine are already posted. But once we have 100 subscribers on YouTube, we get our own URL. And so that just really helps me with promoting our services and being able to help more children. So with that, I hope you have a fabulous, fabulous day. I will check in with you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And stay cool. It's really hot outside today. Bye.